He held our newborn twins for the last time, kissed their tiny heads, and said, "I can't give you the life you deserve." Then he walked away. He never knew the truth. He never asked. Because if he had, he would have learned the woman he left behind was worth $50 billion. Before I tell you what happened after that night, I need you to understand who I was before it. Because this isn't just a story about money. It's a story about love, about pride, and about what happens when fear convinces a good man to make the worst decision of his life. If this story moves you, stay with me until the end and don't forget to follow along because you don't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes out. I was born into money. Not the kind of money people talk about at parties, but the kind that sits quietly in banks and businesses and real estate across 3 continents. My family built an empire over 2 generations, and by the time I was in my 20s, I had more zeros in my name than I knew what to do with. But here's the thing nobody tells you about being that wealthy: it's lonely. Every man who smiled at me, I wondered what he really saw, my money or me. Every friend who called, I wondered if they wanted my company or my connections. So somewhere along the way, I built a second life, a quiet one, an ordinary one. I drove a modest car. I lived in a modest apartment in a modest part of town. I told people I worked in consulting, which wasn't exactly a lie, just not the whole truth. And in that ordinary life, I met him. He was fixing the plumbing in the building next to my apartment the day we met. I remember it clearly because it was raining, and he was soaked from head to toe, laughing about it instead of complaining. He had this way of finding light in small, difficult moments, and I noticed it immediately. We started talking, just small talk at first, about the weather, about the neighborhood, about nothing important at all, but something about him felt different. He wasn't performing for me. He wasn't trying to impress me. He was just being himself, and that honesty was the most attractive thing I had encountered in years. Over the following weeks, I learned more about him. He worked 2 jobs. He sent money home to his mother every month. He had dreams of one day owning his own small repair business. Nothing extravagant, just something that was his. He wasn't poor because he was lazy or lacked ambition. He was poor because life hadn't given him the opportunities it had given me. And the more I got to know him, the more I realized that his character was worth more than anything money could buy. He was patient, he was kind. He showed up early and stayed late, not because someone was watching, but because that's who he was when no one was watching at all. I fell in love with him slowly, the way you fall asleep. You don't notice it happening until you're already there. And somewhere in that process, I made a decision that would define the next several years of my life. I decided not to tell him who I really was. Not because I wanted to deceive him, but because I wanted for once to be loved for exactly who I was and nothing else. I wanted to know that if he chose me, not my bank account. So I kept living my simple life. I kept driving my modest car. I kept renting my modest apartment, even though I owned buildings 20 times its size. And every day, I fell a little deeper in love with a man who had no idea the woman beside him could have bought his entire neighborhood without blinking. We dated for almost 2 years before he proposed. He didn't have a ring that cost thousands of dollars. He had saved for months to buy a small band, and when he got down on one knee in a public park on a Sunday afternoon, his hands were shaking, not because he was nervous about my answer, but because he was scared he wasn't enough. I remember taking his face in my hands and telling him he was more than enough, and I meant every word of it, because to me he was never poor. He was rich in the ways that actually mattered. Our wedding was small. No grand hall, no hundreds of guests, no extravagant details that would have made someone ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Just close family, a modest venue, and a love that felt more real than anything I had experienced in the world I came from. I remember standing there looking at him, thinking that for the first time in my life, someone loved me without knowing what I was worth. And that feeling was worth more than $50 billion ever could be. Not long after the wedding, I found out I was pregnant. And not with one baby, but with twins. I remember the moment we found out, sitting in that small clinic waiting room, holding his hand so tightly my knuckles turned white. He cried, real tears, the kind that come from somewhere deep and honest. He kept saying he couldn't believe he was going to be a father, that he never thought his life would turn out this good. I believed him completely. I had no idea that behind those tears of joy, a quiet fear was already beginning to grow. As my pregnancy progressed, I started to notice small changes in him. He grew quieter at night. He worked longer hours, coming home exhausted, sometimes barely speaking before falling asleep. At first, I thought it was simply the stress of preparing for 2 babies instead of 1. I thought it was normal anxiety, the kind every soon-to-be father feels. I didn't realize that his fear wasn't just about sleepless nights and diaper changes. It was about something much deeper. It was about the idea of failing us. About looking into the eyes of 2 children and not being able to give them everything he believed they deserved. I gave birth to our twins on a cold morning in early spring. I remember the pain, the exhaustion, and then that overwhelming rush of love the moment I held them, one in each arm, their tiny hands wrapping around my fingers. I looked over at him, expecting to see the same joy reflected in his face. And it was there, but underneath it, there was something else, something heavier, something I didn't fully understand until it was too late. For the first week after they were born, he was there. He held them, fed them, walked the floor with them at 3 in the morning when they wouldn't stop crying. But I could feel a distance growing between us, even as he stood right beside me. He started talking about money more than he ever had before, about bills, about formula, about diapers and doctor visits and the cost of raising 2 children instead of 1. I tried to reassure him. I told him we would figure it out together, that we always had. I didn't tell him the full truth, that money would never be our problem, because I was still holding on to the life I had built for us, still protecting that fragile, precious thing of being loved simply for who I was. Then one night, about 2 weeks after the twins were born, I woke up to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, a small bag packed beside him. My heart dropped instantly. I asked him what was happening, and he wouldn't look at me at first. When he finally did, his eyes were filled with tears, but his voice was steady in a way that frightened me. He said he couldn't do this. He said he couldn't watch our children grow up and struggle because of him. He said he felt like a failure every single day, watching me stretch every dollar, watching me worry about bills he couldn't help enough with. He said the kindest thing he could do for us was to leave, to go find a way to become someone who could actually provide and come back when he was ready. I begged him to stay. I told him none of that mattered, that we would build our life together no matter what it looked like. But pride and fear are powerful things, and that night they were louder in his heart than my voice. He kissed our twins on their foreheads, one at a time, and he told them he loved them more than anything in this world. Then he looked at me, and he said the words that would echo in my mind for years afterward. I can't give you the life you deserve. And then he walked out the door, into the night, leaving me standing there holding 2 newborn babies and a heart that felt like it had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. I didn't chase after him. I didn't call his phone 100 times or show up at his job begging him to reconsider. Something in me, some quiet strength I didn't know I had, told me that I needed to focus on my children first. That night, as I sat in the nursery holding both of my babies against my chest, listening to their soft breathing, I made a decision. I would raise them with everything I had. I would give them a life so full of love that they would never feel the absence of what was missing. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Not because of money, because I had more than enough to give my children every comfort they could ever need. The hardship was emotional. It was waking up at 2 in the morning to feed 2 crying babies alone. It was sitting in a quiet apartment, wondering if I had done something wrong, wondering if loving him quietly and simply had somehow pushed him away instead of holding him closer. It was explaining to my family, who had never fully approved of my choice to marry a man with nothing, why he had left, and swallowing my pride when they didn't say I told you so, but I could see it in their eyes. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I stepped back into the world I had hidden for so long. I picked up the reins of my businesses again, working quietly from home in between feedings and diaper changes. I hired help, not because I wanted to replace myself as a mother, but because I needed support to function as both a parent and the head of an empire I had built my entire life around. My children became my anchor. Every decision I made, every meeting I took, every deal I closed, it was all for them. I wanted them to grow up knowing that even when someone they loved walked away, they were never abandoned. They were surrounded by more love than they could ever measure. As the months turned into years, my twins grew into bright, curious children. They asked about their father sometimes, in the innocent way children ask about things they don't fully understand. I never spoke badly about him. I told them he loved them, that sometimes grown-ups make choices out of fear instead of love, and that it wasn't their fault. I didn't know where he was during those years. I heard small things through mutual acquaintances, that he had moved to another city, that he was working odd jobs, that he seemed to be searching for something he couldn't quite find. Part of me hoped he was healing. Part of me wondered if he ever thought about us at all. Meanwhile, my life continued to grow in ways I never expected. The businesses I inherited expanded under my leadership. I made bold decisions that paid off in ways that made headlines in financial circles, though I stayed largely out of the public eye, preferring to let my work speak louder than my face. By the time my twins were entering elementary school, my net worth had grown beyond anything even I had imagined, reaching that staggering number, $50 billion. But none of that mattered to me the way my children's laughter mattered. None of that filled the quiet ache that still lingered from that night he walked out the door. Then, one afternoon, almost 5 years after he left, everything changed. I was attending a community event, one of the few public appearances I made. this one to support a charity dedicated to helping single parents and their children. I had my twins with me, both of them dressed neatly, holding my hands as we walked through the crowd. And that's when I saw him. He was standing near the entrance, wearing a uniform for the venue, working as part of the event staff. Our eyes met across the room, and I watched the color drain from his face. He recognized me instantly, but there was confusion there too, because the woman standing in front of him, surrounded by security, greeted by event organizers with obvious respect, was not the woman he remembered leaving in that small apartment years ago. I saw the exact moment realization began to dawn on him. He looked at me, then at the two children holding my hands, children who had his eyes and my smile, and I watched his entire understanding of the past 5 years shift beneath his feet. He approached slowly, cautiously, like a man approaching something he wasn't sure was real. He said my name, quiet and uncertain. I told my children to go say hello to a family friend nearby, giving us a moment of privacy, and then I turned to face the man I had once loved with my whole unguarded heart. He asked me question after question, his voice shaking. Was this real? Was I really that wealthy? Had I been that wealthy the entire time we were together? I told him the truth plainly and without anger. Yes, I had been born into wealth. Yes, I had hidden it from him because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I had. Yes, the modest life we built together had been a choice, not a necessity. I watched something break in him as the weight of that truth settled over his understanding of everything. He asked me why I never told him, and I asked him something in return. Would it have mattered? Would knowing I had money have changed the fear that made him walk out that door? He didn't have an answer because we both already knew the truth. His leaving was never really about money at all. It was about his own fear of failure, his own belief that he wasn't enough, a belief so deep that no amount of money, mine or his, could have fixed it in that moment. He broke down right there, apologizing over and over, telling me he thought about us every single day since he left. He said he had spent years working, trying to build himself into someone worthy of coming back to us, not realizing that we never needed him to be worthy in the way he imagined. We needed him to simply stay. We needed him to face the hard nights together instead of running from them alone. He told me that learning about my wealth felt like a knife twisting deeper into a wound he had carried for years, because now he understood that everything he sacrificed, all that pride, all that shame, all those lonely nights he spent believing he had to prove himself before he could return, none of it had been necessary. He could have simply stayed. He could have simply loved us through the uncertainty instead of walking away from it. I let him speak. I let him pour out every regret, every apology, every year of guilt he had carried silently. And when he finished, I told him something I needed him to understand clearly. I was never angry about the money. I had never needed his money, and I certainly hadn't needed him to provide in the way society told him a man was supposed to provide. What I needed, what our children needed, was his presence, his steadiness, his willingness to stay through the hard nights instead of disappearing into them. Money can build a house, but it cannot build a home. Only love, real, showing up, staying through the storm, love can do that. He asked, with tears streaming down his face, if there was any chance for us, any path back to being a family. I told him honestly that I didn't know, that the woman standing in front of him now was not the same woman he had left behind. I had grown stronger, more certain of my own worth, not because of the money, but because I had survived something that could have broken me and instead had built me into someone unshakable. I told him that our children deserved to know their father, and that I was willing to let him back into their lives slowly, carefully, if he was willing to do the work of earning that place, not with money, but with consistency, with patience, with showing up every single day without fail. In the months that followed, he did exactly that. He didn't come back asking to be my husband again. He came back asking to be a father, showing up to school events, to soccer practices, to quiet dinners where he listened more than he spoke. He learned to sit in the discomfort of watching me lead a life so much bigger than the one he could offer, without letting that discomfort push him away again. Slowly, our children got to know him, not as the man who left, but as the man who came back and stayed. As for the two of us, our story didn't end in a fairy tale reunion, and I won't pretend it did, because real life rarely wraps up that neatly. What we built instead was something quieter, something rooted in mutual respect and shared responsibility for the two beautiful lives we had created together. Whether love finds its way back fully or simply transforms into something new, one truth remains at the center of everything I experienced. Real relationships were never meant to be built on money. They are built on trust, on loyalty, on the simple, powerful choice to stay when things get hard instead of running when fear whispers that you're not enough. If this story touched you, if it made you think about the difference between what we chase and what actually matters, I want you to sit with this truth for a moment. $50 billion could not buy back the years my children spent without their father in the house. It could not undo the pain of that night he walked out the door, but it also couldn't replace what truly mattered in the end: the courage it takes to stay, to fight through hard seasons together instead of walking away from them alone. Before you go, tell me honestly in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have let him back in, or would you have closed that door forever? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who might be struggling with pride, with fear, with the belief that they aren't enough for the people who love them. And if stories like this move you, make sure you're following along, because there are so many more real, raw, powerful stories still to come. Until next time, remember this: money can fill a bank account, but only love, patience, and loyalty can fill a home.